They were mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, neighbors who came from the Middle East to America at the turn of the 20th century to seek a better way of life for their families. They were strong in faith and rich in heritage. They were a hardworking, generous, and hospitable people. They came through Ellis Island, unsure of what they would find in a new land and culture. Their faith and sense of community would be their strength. With God as their guide, they made their way to American towns and cities. Worcester, Massachusetts was one of those cities and would become home to a large group of Syrian Lebanese families. Far from their homeland, they settled close together where their common language, customs, and religion provided comfort.
Wall Street area was very convenient to them because they took the train sometimes and they stopped at the train station and then made their way walking up to the hill. This is where they settled. By the beginning of the 20th century, there was basically a sizable community on the hill, numbering probably around 150. And it was at that time that they started to think, our elders started to think of building a church.
It was a miniature replica of Lebanon because it was a hill. Lebanon, if anybody's been there, is just a mass of hills and mountains. And that's why Wall Street was always referred to as the Telli. You never said you're going to Wall Street, you'd say you're going to the Telli. Telli in Arabic means hill. So he either said, I'm going up the hill, or I'm going up to the Telli.
They used to gather in what we call in Arabic sahrat, to spend the evenings together, play cards, play backgammon, listen to music, tell stories. So it was a close-knit community when it was on Wall Street.
Everybody was poor, but nobody knew about it. We never knew we were poor. We just knew everybody was in the same situation.
But no matter what they did, one of the most important things for them was the future of their children. And they viewed the future of their children as tied to education. And they knew instinctively that to participate fully in the American experience, you had to educate the kids in an American way.
The one thing that tied them together, the thing that bound them, the cord that tied them together. And that's why their first concern was finding a church.
Their first services were in homes with visiting priests. In 1902, 40 families rented a mission church at 100 Wall Street. This was the beginning of their living legacy. Father Michael Husson, the first Syrian priest ordained in the United States, served the St. George's Parish.
The church rent was $5 a month, and the priest pay, Father Hurim Chaya, that's Father Michael Husson. His pay was $10 a week.
He would walk everywhere he went to visit parishioners, to the church, to bless homes. He catered to the Melkites, he catered to the Catholic, the Protestants, and most of them were baptized by him, and they do remember that.
The first church organizations were formed. The Syrian Orthodox Brotherhood Society was established to secure a permanent church, cemetery, and create a school for religious and Arabic instruction. The Young Mahaiti Society was later established to raise funds to help families in Mahaiti, Lebanon. In 1916, Archbishop Germanos declared the rise of the Syrian Antiochian Orthodox Church, and there was a split nationwide, with many supporting the Russian Synod. But after the Russian Revolution the following year, St. George parishioners voted to affiliate with Antioch, and the official name was St. George Syrian Antiochian Orthodox Church.
And St. George of Worcester became the first church in America to come under the jurisdiction of Antioch. And for that reason, Worcester was called the City of Independence, or in Arabic, Medinat al-Ahrar.
By the late 20s, the parish had grown to 150 families. They purchased the former St. Joseph's Church and moved to 3234 Wall Street.
That was the first time families sat together. So up to that time, it was the women in the back, the men in the front, and women played a very passive part in the church.
That would all change soon as the Ladies' Society was formed, and the women became successful fundraisers.
So they would have a sahra, And they would have some entertainment. Maybe people would bring in moving pictures of their travels or so forth, and they would take up a collection. And the height of all their sadhus was when they made $200 one night. That was a tremendous amount.
During the height of the Depression, God was with these parishioners when Mrs. Nabiha Haddad made a very timely decision.
They banked with the Bancroft Trust Company, and my mother was treasurer at the time, and she woke up on Saturday morning and said, you know, we have a lot of money in the savings account that should be paid on the mortgage. She called her assistant treasurer, Mrs. Salem, and they discussed it, and they says, yes, let's walk down to the bank and transfer that money over to the, and pay against the mortgage. And they did. They walked downtown. Nobody rode, they walked. That Monday morning, everybody woke up to the news that President Roosevelt had closed all the banks, and the women were frantic, you know, with their money. But my mother was happy to tell them that all they lost was $12 because they had transferred $1,000 over to the mortgage.
The Bancroft Trust Bank never opened its doors again. The Lady Society flourished, and women became more involved in other areas of the church.
In 1942, the board of directors approached me and asked me if I would be superintendent of the Sunday school and start a Sunday school. And I hesitated very much about that because I thought, what do I know? But out of deference to their age, they were the elders of the church, I said I would try.
Life on the hill remains simple. Landmarks, experiences, and traditions will forever be etched in the minds of those who grew up there.
Joe Jabour's Coffee House was a place where the young and the old gathered daily, especially on weekends, and they'd discuss politics, they'd discuss the economy. Sports was a very favorite subject. Playing whist, playing poker, backgammon, tauli, they called it tauli, which actually means table, but that's how they referred to backgammon. And in the summertime, they would bring the chairs outside and sit on the sidewalks, and they would play backgammon on the sidewalks.
We used to play games in the street. We used to have the coffee houses, and even if we were youngsters, we used to watch the elders play tauli outside on the sidewalk, and Joe Jabour with his frozen lemonade, which nobody could ever duplicate.
You just couldn't buy a better lemonade anywhere. The only thing I didn't like is he never washed the glasses. He only rinsed them in cold water. But you didn't mind hygiene then. You just drank the lemonade. It was so good.
The markets that were there, Rascala's Market, Ganem's Market, and the El Morocco in its early stages. I think those are the things that stand most in my memory. And the bakery, Cale's Bakery, where we used to get the fresh bread.
When we were hungry at around noontime, we'd go to the bakery, buy a loaf of hot Syrian bread, walk over to Ganem's Market, which was a few feet down, buy some ham and some cheese, roll it in the hot Syrian bread, buy a Coke for a nickel, and you had the treat of your life.
No business or landmark was the source of more pride than the El Morocco restaurant. Celebrities and locals alike would come for Middle Eastern fare served by its most hospitable owner, Paul Aboudi and his family.
The impact would have to be that the El Morocco and its reputation and the fact that it was so well known, I think everybody in the Syrian community was proud of that fact, that we had a restaurant in our city that was so well known and and had such good food, and that everybody in the city enjoyed going there, and it was so well known outside the city. Because if you mentioned the word El Morocco, it would seem like everybody had heard of it at one time or another.
In 1938, Father Michael Husson passed away, having served St. George for almost 4 decades. Father Constantine Abu Adl came to serve the parish. He incorporated more English into the services, established a choir, and Boy Scout Troop Number 72 was formed. America was at war in the 1940s, and during World War II, the sons of these Middle Eastern immigrants served their country honorably.
During the war, the Knights of St. George was probably one of the most active groups in the church. And we formed the Knights of St. George Journal, which we sent to all the boys in the service. We compiled all their addresses and had this journal, and we received so many letters from the boys saying how wonderful it was to hear about what was going on at home.
The community lost sons in the war, but many returned safely, and 1945 brought two reasons for celebration on the Hill: the end of World War II and the celebration of burning the mortgage. The St. George parishioners who made a joyful noise unto the Lord were well known for their outstanding sound. Choir directors, choir members, and chanters have always been recognized for their talent. The choir was skillfully led in the early years by Albert McCool.
He was trained in music. He had a most beautiful bass voice, taking music lessons, and he was the only one that really was qualified to do it at the time. It's their love of the faith. It's their desire to please the parish. And the fact that we toured the country and people got to hear us, that we became known.
Our music is the soul of our worship, you see. And here in Worcester, we are very, very fortunate that perhaps we have the most beautiful choir in the Archdiocese.
It's a great feeling to have people come to you after the service at coffee hour or something, say, oh, the choir just sent me to heaven today. As far as the chanters are concerned, this parish has always been blessed with some of the best.
The first generation of chanters, George Kalil, Sam Salem, Dave Dowd, Frank, and Philip George, sang together for decades and shared a unique camaraderie.
Father Michael Hassan took 4 or 5 of us under his wing, and he was teaching us to know the tones that are said in a church. It takes a lot to sing in Arabic with these tones. You got to have the feeling. And like I said before, you have to know the meaning of the words to get them out. You know, if it's sad, if it's happy, you got to let it out from your voice. And your voice tells you whether it's happy or sorrowful. And there's nothing better than standing here and opening your mouth and praise the Lord.
By the mid-50s, the parish was ready to commemorate 50 years with its Golden Jubilee. In 1957, Father Abu Adal retired, and Assistant Pastor Father Thomas Ruffin served St. George until 1959. Then Father Athanasius Saliba served briefly until Right Reverend George Ganem was called to serve St. George in 1960. At that time, Philip Haddad Sr. led the first effort toward a new, larger church for the growing parish.
There was 2 factions in the church, very strong factions. One faction was totally opposed to building a new church. They wanted to buy the 3 deckers that faced the church, knock them down, and build a parking lot. The faction, the majority faction, wanted to build a new church. Where, that was up in the air, but wanted to build a new church. So when the blueprints were finished, a parish meeting was held, believe it or not, at the Syrian American Hall on Plantation Street.
The cost was excessive, and the motion to build was defeated. After several years, talk of a new church reemerged, and in 1967, Father Ganem asked the board to appoint a new building commission. Edward Nabhan was elected chairman and secured the land on Anna Street from the Bishop of the Catholic Archdiocese.
And we settled for a figure that was unbelievable, $15,000. The lot was probably worth $150, but being in the religion that we were, he just gave it to us practically.
George Hayek created and presented the new church design and was named the building contractor.
The biggest challenge, I think, was getting people to understand what we were trying to do for our parish and getting him to come up with the money that was necessary.
If it wasn't for Eddie Nabhan, and I say this with all my heart and soul, his leadership and his motivation of all of us, we wouldn't be standing and sitting here today. That's how strong his leadership was and how much he motivated us. And to go along with that was the extreme cooperation he received from the builder, George Hayek.
Construction for the new complex began with the groundbreaking in 1968.
Well, it was a glorious day. A number of people at the time didn't believe it, and they came to me and thanked me and thanked me and thanked me. I said, don't thank me, thank the Lord for what we got.
Exciting. It was exciting. George ran the job, of course, every day. It was Hayek Building and Realty, Inc., HB&R Co., that actually built the place. He knew all about these Byzantine things. He executed the design, the plan. It was a fulfillment of a dream. How many people get to build their own church, their own parish church?
May 1970, Consecration Weekend was an historic moment in time for the St. George Parish. Generous, hard-working parishioners had realized a dream that church founders could have never imagined.
When I came here and I walked into this church and I just stopped right away. And I looked up into this beautiful dome and I saw Christ the King, we call him the Pantocrator, just looking down on us and embracing us with his love. I said, this is a masterpiece. When I announced that St. George of Worcester from now on is going to be the Cathedral of New England, there was a deafening applause. You know, the people were so excited, and they just they were happy, and then felt that somehow God has rewarded them for the outstanding job that they did.
What could I ask for more than this? It was the most wonderful feeling a man could ask for as a Christian. It only proves that the Lord had to have a hand in what we were doing.
To me, it was the proudest moment in my church life, and I think in everybody's life, when the bishop proclaimed our church a cathedral. I'm getting goosepimples while I'm telling you this. I think anybody would if they had a strong feeling or were involved in the building of the church. That's a moment in history. I mean, that's the most historic moment, I think, in the history of this church.
Soon after, a new tracker pipe organ would adorn the cathedral. Funds were raised through a special concert directed by Albert McCool and performed by the St. George Choir. Father Ganem retired in 1974, and the parish named the assembly room in his honor for his dedicated service in helping to build the cathedral. The 70s continued to see scores of St. George youth becoming altar boys and Boy Scouts under the direction of Vladimir Chick Swiden, beloved Boy Scout leader, altar boy director, and subdeacon. The Women's Club raised record amounts of money for the new cathedral through dinner dances, fashion shows, bazaars, and festivals.
The women are the backbone of the church. They have cooked, baked, did whatever had to be done to raise thousands of dollars to pay off mortgages and whatever the church needed. It was only the older women at one time, but since then we've come a long way. A lot of the younger women have joined, and we're working together, and we're following in the footsteps of our parents.
Women increased their involvement in the church, including being allowed to serve on the board of directors for the first time in the early 70s.
The three women elected were Madeline Wood, Margaret George, and Violet Salem. That I remember. Of course, there were others that followed them. But I must admit, they contributed an awful lot to the administration of the church. They were very knowledgeable, very intelligent, and they were really a great asset to the church.
Father Paul Moses began his service in 1974, encouraging the formation of the Men's Club. In 1978, Father George Shaheen came to St. George, and in 1984 hosted a patriarchal visit to Worcester of his Beatitude Ignatius IV. In 1985, Father Michael Abdelahad arrived at St. George in time for the burning of the cathedral mortgage just 15 years after the consecration. This was a testament to the hard work and generosity of its parishioners. Father Michael began his service to the parish with a focus on the cathedral youth.
If you've got young people involved, the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles and all the extended families become involved. But it's also a matter of education. You know, the kids needed to learn more. You know, they knew some, but one of the things that really is a hallmark now is if people talk about Worcester, you know, on a national level, they still talk about the choir, they still talk about the chanters, but they really, really talk about the kids.
Through the 90s, youth organizations thrived, and the Men's Club became renowned for their great cooking and fundraising. In 1997, Father Michael was elevated to archpriest, and parish son Donald Peters was ordained to the holy priesthood.
The response of the parish to my ministry has just been overwhelming to me. You know, there's a level at which we're so close just from growing up here together, but the ease with which they've accepted, you know, the different role that I have at this point has just made it so easy for me to minister.
The new millennium brought plans for an historic centennial celebration. 100 years of the parish is exemplified by the spirit of its parishioners.
Good people, very loving people, very joyful people. I think if I had to characterize the parish then and now, I would use the word joy.
As the parish marks its centennial, lessons learned and messages of hope are passed to future generations.
In order to perpetuate the faith and allow our next generations, we have to also sacrifice and give and support the church.
I hope 25 years from now or 50 years from now that same faith will hold them together here.
They set a great example for us, and it's up to us to carry it on.
My fond hope is that our American-speaking, thoroughly American, Orthodox community and parish 50 years from now, 100 years from now, will adhere to the faith, defend the faith, practice it, and keep the church in good shape.
I hope the future will be even brighter than it is right now. And the only way the future will be brighter is by our children and grandchildren and the great-grandchildren and the youth taking a major role into this community and taking it to the top.
I hope the future generations carry on the work that our generation and the generation before us has done, and I hope our children and grandchildren stay with the Orthodox faith.
I mean, you have so much activity going on in this church that all I can visualize a very, very bright future because we got the youth involved. And who's going to be our successors is the youth. And now that they're involved, I feel we're in safe hands, and the future looks very bright.
The people are the temple of the Holy Spirit. You are the temple of the Holy Spirit. The people are the church.
As descendants of these courageous individuals who came to America with God as their guide and a prayer in their heart, we honor their memory during this centennial celebration for the gift of the Orthodox faith and lessons of community and dedicated service to Christ. We pass these gifts to the future generation as a living legacy.